And welcome to another Mailbox. And this week there's been such a range of discussions in the comments on the various videos from the past week that I think we can actually go through comments on completely different topics each time. So, first of all, sorry, I'm a bit wet. I've just been outside in the pouring rain, had some storm damage to the fencing panel. So the landlords have just been round and I was sort of helping them muck about with it. Anyway, so on to the winners from the mailbox from last week. There was only a few, actually. It was indeed Shrine of Aviana in Mount Hygel. And on to this week's. So, there was first of all this comment. Says, I really like that person's idea from last week using engineering to put mailbox in creative places, and it will test my creativity. I'm not sure it will, but I also agreed that it was a good idea. So I've started doing that this week. I've tried to make it sort of easiest. I suppose the downside to doing this is I don't want to make it too obscure. I want there to be something that sort of lets you know where it is without making it too super obvious. But, like, it'd be a bit obvious if I put it at the Stormwind Gates. At the same time, I also don't want to make it too difficult trying to describe where it is. I don't need coordinates. I'm not going to check coordinates for a start off. So, but where I place it now may not have a specific place name, so it's like describing, oh, well, it's this bit. So anyway, see how you get on with this one. So what you'll need to do is to just identify roughly where it is, as long as it's correct, then where we go. So that's where is the mailbox this week. That's going to have to be the mailbox model from now on. I'm not going to really be able to alternate between Horde and Alliance. It doesn't mean to say I won't be able to do Horde areas there. So, on to the first one, and it is to do with Blizzard's attitude to World Firsts. And we talked about this based on Ian Hazzard-Costas's and Josh Allen's, I suppose, Q&A last week, where he was saying, because it's to do with the fact that the next raid, which doesn't even have a name yet, we were calling it Siege of Zuldazar, but he says that's not going to be the name there, thinking of something else. But anyway, it's going to be a different experience for Horde and Alliance. Now, that, of course, is going to mean that it is going to be, of necessity, slightly easy for Horde and Alliance. Now, he's not arguing against that. His argument is that the World First race is a community device. They've never talked about World... Well, they have, really, but as a supporting a community thing. So, yeah, it's actually not true. But it's not an official thing. I'll accept that. And I accepted that in our post-discussion. Or our live, post-live discussion. But anyway, what I argued was that although it's a community device because Blizzard didn't do anything themselves to note who was getting these ranks. And it would just be a nice engagement with the community. Now, someone's saying here then, it says, concerning the World First race and the different boss orders, I'm firmly with Ian here. The race itself is a cool little community thing, but it should not ever be a reason to limit design space. The player base really likes to put Blizzard into damned if you do, damned if you don't positions with a lot of things when there is no answer that won't give them crap. Now here, this is not one of those situations. A damned if you do and damned if you don't is literally what it says. It's like, if they do one thing, there's two things, it's a very binary situation. They either do this, in which case a load of people moan at them, or they do this and an equal number of people moan at them. This is not one of those situations. No one was asking for them to design totally unique scenarios. People, all right, some people got a little bit excited, but no one was asking for it. So it's not, if they just said, look, you know, we're making it the same experience, no one would have said, so this is not a damned if you do and damned if you don't. This is only a, you're doing something, they're doing something that they know is going to interfere with something that the community have been doing for over 10 years. Of course they're going to get stick for it. Now, if he's happy that after a couple of years it'll all blow over, I think the important thing is if people appreciate it, and that's going to depend on the realization. There's no point in saying now whether it's a good or a bad idea. We need to actually see how it works out. If it works out really well, if at the end of that raid, the people who've taken part in it at all levels decide that it's actually a big step forward in terms of shaking up the raid experience, and it's a very successful experiment, then it'll all blow over completely. If it doesn't, then, as I say, what they're doing is interfering with something that community have come up with that they could have got involved in. They could have engaged in beyond just tweeting their congratulations. Because there are some things that, again, are community developed that Blizzard don't and indeed shouldn't have to cope with. For example, damage meters is the most obvious one. You know, damage meters has nothing to do with Blizzard. You know, we have damage meters, we have logs. None of that is anything to do with Blizzard. They don't officially support it. They don't try and stop us doing it. They're very pro-community in many ways, and they always have been, in terms of letting us develop these add-ons. Not all MMOs do this. But at the same time, they have used it quite cleverly, I think, because a lot of the times, it must be very difficult for the encounter designers after this amount of time, when the core mechanics of the game have not really changed a great deal, for them to design new and challenging encounters, especially for people who've been there, done that. Because, you know, when I see a raid boss now, with a mythic or anything, and I see a mechanic, I just think, oh yeah, it's that mechanic from such and such. That's all it is. It's just a variation on that. I mean, when I came across Talok and we looked at that and we just said, oh yeah, it's just like Grobulus. You just see these fights come and going and the same mechanics. So there's two ways in which they can make them challenging to people who've experienced them all before. And when you've experienced a mechanic, you know how to deal with it. So what do you do to make it challenging? Two things. One, you put multiple mechanics together, and that's what generally happens. The toughest fights in a raid tend to be ones where an individual mechanic is not that hard to deal with. It's the combination of them, particularly when it requires you to do what appears to be contradictory things to deal with both of them at the same time. Second is you put something in that fight that means you've got to lower, particularly for the DPS, you've got to lower your personal DPS to help beat the encounter. Because they know about damage meters and they know that there's damage whores, and they know that people will be reluctant to do mechanics if it means not doing maximum DPS. So I think they're quite cunning about using these community-based things. And I just think with this one, I mean, the jury's out for me personally. It's one of those things. If it works out, and I don't just mean works out as in the raid is enjoyable, because the raid would have been enjoyable if they'd have just kept it the same bosses. It specifically has to be, I don't want to go as far as saying the best raid ever, but it specifically has to be the best raid experience ever. It has to be a better raid experience for them to be able to justify it, because they are tearing down an established community event. The World First Race is an established community event, which Blizzard have never railed against, bear in mind. They've, you know, tweeted their support and things like that and talked about it. It's not that they've never officially acknowledged that it's a thing. They have. So it has to be a much better raid. People at the end of it have to say, yeah, I'm glad they've done this, even though it's sort of mucked about with the World First. And if it is, then it's fine. And if not, then this debate will keep rumbling, I'm sure. Anyway. All right, on to the next one. Little Paladin one sneaked in. But it says not specifically about Paladins that I want to talk about here. So it says, because this is about the new animation, so we've got some new animations. Many classes will be getting new animations in 8.1. Some of them quite nice, some of them... It says, changes don't mean anything. You can glow all you want, but it's not fun getting kited at battlegrounds because Paladins suck mobility. See, I don't know about PvP. I can imagine I don't know. All I can say is that you may die, but you'll leave a good-looking corpse behind you. So that'll be fine there. Obviously, in terms of animations and changes, I mean, what I'd say on this one is it's different people that do them. You know, if they're designing new animations, that's not taken away from the class design process. The people who are doing those animations and those new looks have got nothing to do with the class design team. It's purely cosmetic. It's the art department, really. So, yeah, it's not, one is not coming at the cost of another, is all I will say there. I think the OP knows that, actually, though. Just emphasising the fact that the class design is more important, which it is. I agree with that. The other thing, though, with the class design, like with an animation, as soon as it's done, you can put it on the PTR. With class design, you can't, because, you know, you change one spell, that might have knock-on effects. You have to change others and things like that. So sometimes they could be doing a lot of work and just not putting it on the PTR yet, and then it all goes on much later on. So it doesn't mean to say they're not doing anything just because nothing's appearing on the PTR just yet. Also, remember, each design, there's no designer of a particular spec. You know, there's about, on average, each designer's got about 3 specs each to deal with. On average, sort of, there's a bit of collaboration here and there. So they can be working on one at one time. It doesn't mean to say they're not going to be working on the others. On to spec strengths while we're talking about specs. So, I was making the point that certain specs, like, there's usually on a fight, a raid fight, a key mechanic you need to deal with. If you don't, you're just going to wipe. So some raid leaders, even of very high guilds, I've experienced this and I've seen it in other guilds as well, will just focus on, right, we're just going to take the classes that are best at that. So if you've got 20 DPS in your roster and you're going to take 14 DPS, that sounds like a lot of DPS, but some have that, then it'll be a case, we're going to take the 14 that can deal with that signature mechanic of this fight the best. When you may not need to. You know, you may only need 10, and then you take your other 4 for doing other things. So I was talking about Thete Devour as being one where there's certain classes, melee classes, that are not that great at dealing with the ads, that a lot of guilds are just not taking. But there are guilds who are taking and have completed 8 out of 8 in a very high position, top 50, and they have taken those classes, not loads of them, but some have taken those classes, and those classes have done really well. But they haven't been putting them on the ads, is the point I was making. So what they said is, while I agree with the sentiment of letting some players ignore ads when it's viable, Thete Devour is a bad example. If anyone in your raid isn't hitting those ads, it's generally a wipe. They are tuned tightly enough that everybody needs to hit them every time they're up. That is actually not true. That is not true. You will always be able to have most on them and you'll be fine. If someone is wiping because not absolutely everybody is switching to them quickly enough, then it means that either your raid is not doing enough DPS, either because you're not quite geared enough, that sort of gear skill combination isn't quite up to it, because you complete it at a certain level, or because people are, you know, the people who do need to move into them and are good at moving to them are delaying, they're leaving a last cast on the boss or something like that. It says, now you can play to a spec strength there. For instance, you could have a rep pad in the mutated mass as it's up longer, but everyone needs to hit those ads in most guilds, especially on progression. But there, indeed, you're sort of agreeing with my point. You put them on what is that spec strength. And indeed, if you look at guilds who've completed 8 out of 8 already and completed it very quickly, you know, it's not even that they've only just completed it, they completed it a couple of weeks ago. You will see enhancement shamans, rep paladins, you know, unholy DKs even, would you believe it, on those things. And true enough, they are on the mutated mass, because in that specific case, then that is something they can move to and it's worth their while. The example I was mostly given was Cenarius, sorry. Yeah, Cenarius, behave yourself. Because I'd done that one. I haven't done Thete Devour because casual. And that was one where I was just left on the boss. Now, in the case of Thete Devour, yes, I'd be put on the mutated mass, but it's still the same principle. You don't have to have everyone on the ads, because you don't need everyone on them. You will need most on some of those fights where it's tuned super tightly. But there is never a fight that's tuned to the point where you need absolutely everyone, because then that's like saying in the first 2 months you're only going to have 10 guilds kill everything. That'd be ridiculous. But yeah, the general point I was making is there should be no class or spec that if they're one of your best players in your guild, you should absolutely be taking them on that fight. Absolutely. It'd be silly to bench one of your best players, who, bear in mind, you know, one of your best players is not just going to be playing that class well and playing the mechanics, you know, better than most in that guild. They're also there offering insights into how things are working, because those players generally are more aware of everything else that's going on as well. So yeah, you'll absolutely see top guilds, top 50 guilds taking, well, I know because I've seen it, the enhancement shamans, the rep paladins, unholy DKs, feral druids are in there. Not many, but some. Unholy DKs, I think, are the least. Or, you know, frosty. I don't think DKs in general are generally doing all that well at the moment on that fight specifically. But they're there, just in smaller numbers. Because some guilds go, do you know what? You're one of our best players. We're taking you. Simple as that. Next one. So this is about, you know, something none of us really know about, which is what goes on inside Blizzard. So someone's saying here, Blizzard still has the same problem, and it's one that Blizzard is unwilling to fix. All their people think the same, so if they can't think of a way to solve a problem, they're screwed, as they're all sitting in the same echo chamber. I don't believe that that's happening, not because I know how things work there, I don't. But I do know how things work in places of work, because I've worked in several places before where I can imagine from the outside, it looks like none of us have a clue what we're doing. But that's generally not the case. You know, Blizzard talk a lot, and even former Blizzard employees like Ghostcrawler talks a lot about the collective agreements and, you know, the fact that it's a team and they all agree together. That is never true. There are always influential people who have a disproportionate influence on a decision. It's never a vote. You don't get referenda taken in these development teams or indeed any workplace. Now, generally speaking, you expect in a workplace for those people with a disproportionate amount of influence to be the more senior people. You know, the more senior you have the power to say, no, we're doing it this way, even if everyone else disagrees with you. And that generally is how it works. However, you always get in workplaces someone who, even for their level of seniority, has a disproportionate amount of influence because they're good at persuading the people with the power to put their foot down. And I strongly suspect that that's what's happening at Blizzard. I strongly suspect when they do something controversial and it's just like, you know, half the people are happy with it and half are not. Okay, well, that's just one of those things. You know, I'm not going to sort of say, oh, you know, that's one person being a dickhead. But when you've got a situation that is universally unpopular or largely unpopular at the very least, and ends up later on down the line being something they change because they just didn't realise how unpopular it would be for some stupid reason. In those situations, I am certain, it surely has to be, that the majority of the developers were not happy either, and that it's someone, basically, who's a bit of an idiot, who got their way. I just think that's the way it is. I don't think there's an echo chamber in Blizzard. I do think it's very difficult, as I've said before, for them to really discern proper feedback because there's so many like special snowflakes there, and there's so many people who'll tell them they're doing a great job no matter what they say, that they just listen to those and ignore everyone else. Now, it's quite right when it comes to the internet to ignore trolls, but how do you tell the difference between trolls and people who are just being critical when you've got loads of people telling you you're doing a great job? It's probably quite difficult, isn't it? I think human nature doesn't really help in that situation. Because most of us don't experience that. Most of us do not experience ridiculous numbers of people telling us we're all doing a fantastic job to the point where we can't actually tell genuine criticism from trolling. So I always try and give them a little bit of credit there. It's still not good enough, but still. Right, coming on to another one. This is talking about the Azeroth situation. So just to lend some context to this statement. Well, I'll read the statement first, then I'll give you context. It says, we have a priest in my guild who is playing Shadow in raids and is a healer when we needed a 5th healer for certain bosses in Mythic, like Vectus. Ooh, I remember testing Vectus. He also plays healer in Mythic Plus. This means he is playing Shadow on 90% of the raid, Holy 10%, and then 100% of the Mythic Plus he does is as Discipline. He doesn't reforge every time, and it annoys him when he does due to the cost, and annoys when he doesn't because he knows he isn't doing his best. I think the cost should at least reset every week. Sadly, Josh said that they're more like to restrict the reforging more. So in context, what was happening here, they were talking about the fact that there's people having to change quite a lot, and they were even highlighting the example of someone who had paid 80k gold for a respec. Ian Hazakostas was saying, well, it decays very rapidly, which is true, it does. But the problem was he kept giving scenarios of, you know, how it's actually all right that are not realistic. He kept talking, well, not realistic as in it doesn't happen, but he didn't acknowledge a scenario like this. He was talking about, for example, people, oh, you know, someone's left the guild and you decide to go from DPS to healing. But he was always talking about it as someone who's going to be doing it for the next few weeks. By which, of course, if they change back, yes, it would cost next to nothing to respec it back again. That's true. But what about this scenario? Because this scenario happens a lot in Mythic Plus raiding, where you've got, and these people are like gold dust in your raid, where you've got good players who can play well different specs, particularly if it's different roles, because that's what's more important when it's different roles, although different specs within pure DPS classes is also important. But when it's different roles, you absolutely ought to be changing it, because this person's saying here, so they play Shadow 90% of the raid, so when they switch to Holy, if they can't respec their gear for Holy purposes, well, that means one of their trait, well, potentially two, but at least one of their traits is not doing them any good at all, realistically. You know, because they'll have the DPS one instead of the healing one. And with a priest, you've got 2 healing ones, don't you, on that ring? Because 2 of your specs are healing specs. Particularly bad for a priest. And it's really annoying. Now, this is the problem with the Q&As in general, because they just answer it in the ways they want. If it were done as an interview, this is where we'd actually get proper feedback, because someone would say, ah, yes, but what about this scenario? And they would pick this specific scenario. Then Ian would get to justify it. And if he could, then okay. But at least we wouldn't feel that they were using scenarios that are not really getting at the root of the problem and just there to justify, you know, what is, for a lot of people's point of view, poor design. And that's ultimately the problem with the format of the Q&A. If it were actually a proper interview, and I mean not an interview from a suck-up, an interview from someone who's not going to be, like, rude, but actually asking follow-up questions to really get them to justify or to acknowledge where there are issues with it. That would be way, way better. I am available. The next one. So again, someone here in support of the way they were doing the Q&A. So I just want to again explain. So it says, yes, and everything he talked about has already been said in Blue Post, but the hate in the comments of that Q&A make no sense to me because they've already made changes on PTR and announced others that are coming. They are currently trying to take feedback and improve the game, while people continue to give horrible criticism that isn't constructive at all. Now, here's what we go. Yes, there are some people in the comments that go too far, granted. However, saying you don't understand why some people will be a little bit mad is, I'll give the context if you really don't know. Here is the situation. You say that they are already making changes on the PTR. They're making changes on the PTR, which remember is not live, to things that were highlighted as problems over half a year ago and Blizzard ignored, or worse still, didn't ignore but said it's not a problem. This is the situation. Imagine this. You, as a large body of, not just one person, but a lot of theory crafters and people like that, you know, people who are really into the game and take a careful interest in it and are actually spending a lot of free time providing lots of detailed feedback, telling Blizzard that this is going to cause this specific problem. Blizzard say, no, it's not. It's all going to work out fine. Then when it goes live, it causes not just a problem, but that specific problem that was highlighted. Blizzard then acknowledged that specific problem. That's going to make you annoyed. You are going to be annoyed. And some people, yes, okay, they go a bit far, but that's what causes the level of annoyance. And saying that there is changes on the PTR, they should never have been on the PTR. It should have been on the beta, and then it should have been fixed for when it went live. Now, yes, sometimes things occur that no one really predicted, but that's not the case here. Then it says they are currently trying to take feedback and improve the game. Trying, not really good enough. They've already said they don't know how to interpret the feedback. And they've also tried saying that they never got feedback on certain areas of the game during alpha and beta, which is not true. They had reams of it. They just didn't pay any attention to it. And the fact that we got very little communication, this is the first expansion where there's been so little communication between the developers and the general community, I've never known anything like it. I mean, in Legion, there's an awful lot of that going on. There was an awful lot of, no, it's all going to be fine, and then it wasn't fine. But at least they were saying so on the forums. This time round, they hardly said anything. And most of the blue posts on the beta forums were not actually replies to anything. It was just them hijacking a post and saying what's coming up without actually discussing anything. There were a couple, very few. So again, this idea that they're trying to take feedback, improve the game, no, because they're actively trying to keep feedback at arm's length. They really do have this view of us that we're all trolls and that we shouldn't be dealt with. So it says, while people continue to give horrible criticism that isn't constructive at all. There's that word constructive again. We had that last week, didn't we? So again, it depends on what you mean by constructive. Because as someone pointed out, there is a game developer, not Blizzard, who argued that constructive criticism, I mean, what is constructive criticism? Well, you know, the dictionary definition is just criticism that's intended to help improve things. If someone's saying what specific problem they have with the game, then that can technically fulfill that definition. I personally think constructive criticism should involve a suggested solution. It may not be a good solution, but at least suggest one. But at the same time, it's not an actual requirement. And there's some people, developers, that have said they prefer it if you don't do that. But Blizzard say they prefer it if you don't even post feedback on their forums. They've actually said that. Ian Hazacostas has said that. He said he'd prefer it if people didn't post feedback on the forums. He'd rather they did it in Twitter. Of course he does, because it's very difficult to get, first of all, any level of detail in a tweet. And that's why you have to have all these people going, starting a post, 1 out of 12, expecting everyone to read them all through. And secondly, you don't get much of a discussion on Twitter either. Not like you would on a forum. So the idea that they're trying to take feedback, I don't buy that. They're trying to avoid feedback, but look like they're trying to take feedback. So I think that's where the anger, if that's not too strong a word, comes from. Just to add on to that one. And then just a quick one here. It says, just stop doing these Q&As because you don't have I guess you can guess what the word is, clue. First of all, that was the comment. I looked at that and thought, what have I done wrong this time? Then they've added into brackets there. It says, not you, I mean Ian and the toxic blah, 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 to his right. I am going to say here, I actually appreciate them doing the Q&As. I might criticise the format of them, and this particular Q&A, the latest Q&A, so in fact, someone other than me said, of all the Q&As, this is the one where there were the least answers. It was mostly them just saying, yeah, that's the problem, we don't know how to fix it. Which is actually really maddening when it's obvious how to fix it. But I appreciate the fact they do them. Because it's not like if they didn't do them, that engagement would be replaced with something else. It wouldn't. Nothing would replace it. We'd have less feedback. Although this last Q&A was a bad one, I would say it was a bad one because it's certain. Because I was wondering beforehand, is this because they do these? But we've had so many of them recently, which I'm certainly not going to complain about that either. But I'm thinking, is it a firefighting one, or is it one that they would just naturally do at this time anyway? I really don't think it was a firefighting one, because if anything, they poured scotch onto the fire. You know, whenever they go up and acknowledge... See, if they were going to go there and just blatantly face down and say, no, this isn't a problem. These problems you're having are not actual problems, deal with it. Well, okay, that's not good. But, you know, at least they'd be saying that they don't acknowledge a problem. When they come on and acknowledge problems, first of all, problems that we highlighted, as I say, over half a year ago. But when they come on and acknowledge problems and then say they don't know how to fix it, that's like worse than not saying anything. And they get to cherry pick the question. And people talk about this fact that they cherry pick the questions, which of course they do. But to give them their credit, they do still put awkward questions in there. It's just that we don't always get good answers for them. Again, that's where we lose out on having an interview. If we had an interviewer, an independent interviewer, someone who's not trying to ingratiate themselves, or who, because technically Josh is the interviewer, but he's obviously a PR person, he works there. So it's not really an interview. Certainly not an independent interview. But if they had that format, we'd guaranteed get better answers. We still may not like the answers, but we would actually get answers. The situation we had in that last Q&A where we basically, well, we got a couple, but we didn't get many, is that could never possibly happen if it was a proper interview process. So yeah, it's the format that causes that problem. But the fact that they exist, I applaud. I'm not going to criticise the fact that they exist. I just sometimes criticise the way they do it. But that's my opinion. Next one, on to animations. So again, little paladin one, but it can apply to anyone. It says, hope there's a glyph to keep old wings, not a fan of the new ones. It's too flashy and Avenging Wrath is just a classic. And this brings into like different people's attitude towards animations and looks for spells and things like that. Because there are some people who, when they argue the case for having a new animation for their class, argue that we haven't had one for X number of years, or, you know, this one has never changed. So there are some people who want them to change just because to shake it up every few years. You know, familiarity breeds contempt type argument. And then there are some that just want them to look good. And if it looks good, it can stay looking good forever. So I would quite like, I wouldn't, sometimes they do this, don't they? But I wouldn't hold my breath on doing it all the time. I would certainly support the idea that glyphs are always used to allow you to choose the look of an animation for a spell if there are multiple on offer. So, okay, so like I've said, there are a few new animations coming in for Paladins, and indeed for other classes as well. I think it would be nice if just by default, there was always, when this happened, there was always a glyph to allow you to use an old one. So if there's 3 or 4 different versions for some spells that have been, just give glyphs out that let you choose which one you want. That would be way better. I would quite like that situation. You know, I'd very much support that. And again, that would be something. Again, we're going to end up criticising Blizzard again. It's just one of these things that you just think, why don't you just do something like this? Something like this would please a lot of people. Again, the cosmetic side of it is a very powerful draw for a lot of people. And it does baffle me that they don't do it enough. But yeah, the glyph system, which, you know, no longer fulfills the purpose for which it was originally brought into the game, could absolutely be used for this. And as I say, sometimes it is. It's just not consistently so. But yeah, hopefully they will with that and any other ones. On to the next one. So, without talking about spoilers, because this one came from the video I did on the quest, the Darkshore Warfront quest from the Horde point of view, which I'm not going to talk about. Other than just to say that there's another choice, just like the Battle of Lordaeron, where, you know, as Horde, you had a choice. You basically got the mask to protect you from the Blight, but you could also have a Blight canister, so you had a choice. You could either fight the Alliance, so supposedly honourably, except that they were choking on Blight, so it wasn't really that honourable, or you could spread the Blight yourself, and that was obviously the dishonourable choice. So you as a Horde player got to choose, are you fully in support of Sylvanas' actions, or are you not? There is a similar choice in the Darkshore Warfront. Although I would argue that the things you do that where you don't get a choice are far more dishonourable. In fact, there's not. In fact, the choice it gives you is if you chose the supposedly bad path. I don't think that would actually be considered dishonourable at all, because basically, someone attacks you, an Alliance member attacks you, and you sort of beat them up, but you don't kill them, you get a choice whether you want to kill them or not. It's like, well, of course I would kill them. That's not dishonourable. They've attacked me. Obviously, they were very much provoked, but nonetheless, they attacked me. Whereas some of the other things you do are beyond the pale. But when it says, so I played as Horde, I refused to spread the Blight, but most players with me did. Suggested, of course, that most players are totally fine with it. I did practice a little bit, but I never did it on my Paladin on the Alpha or Beta. I think was it Beta by the time it was working? Can't remember. But in live, yeah, I would never dream on any of my characters of spreading the Blight either, or taking the evil path for anything. Not that it makes any difference. The same events still unfold, you know. But what I would like is if there are a few more situations like this, where you did have more of these choices, particularly as it's quite polarised within the Horde at the moment, because a lot of people are saying, well, the Horde itself now is basically evil. They're doing a lot of things that were completely beyond the pale before. But as an individual player within the Horde, I don't want to play it like that. So maybe there should be more of these choices. The same events will happen because at the end of the day, you're one person in the whole Horde. You taking a conscientious, objective stance is not going to change the chain of events. But it just makes you feel better that you haven't actively taken part in it. And maybe they should do a little bit more of that. But, you know, they're just throwing in the odd one, aren't they? And at the risk of drawing the ire of Horde players, it could also be argued that if you think about people's not justification, desire to play Horde characters in the early days, before people did it just because that's what you had to do if you wanted to raid, could be argued that playing a Horde race allows you to basically murder and pillage, and apparently that's honourable for them. You know, I don't know. Now, okay, so on to a few things now. First of all, I said that in the mailbox, if anyone, because there was an add-on that used to let you remove NPC names, and people here saying, it's in the interface options, you know, you can go to interface names, NPC names. Yes, I am aware there's an option there. And it does nothing. Here, let me show you. This is my character. This is the interface panel, where it clearly shows do not display names for any NPCs. And you can see either side of that box NPCs with their names in all their misplaced glory. And this isn't an option I changed to. That option has been selected for years and doing nothing. Now, someone did show me a screenshot where the NPC names were indeed not there. So it must be possible it's either Blizzard just personally trolling me, or as someone else suggested, oh, is it maybe an add-on that's doing this? Well, LVUI does sometimes do funny things. So then what I did is I removed all my add-ons, or disabled them. No difference. No difference at all. Do not display names for any NPCs. There's an innkeeper there, there's a cook there. It does it for all NPCs. They don't go away. Now, if someone can point out something that I am doing wrong, now that I look at it, I've just seen something. So you may be right, I'm an idiot. A box has just appeared. I've only just seen this. Actually, maybe it is LFUI. Because now I'm looking at it, it says always show nameplates. Is this like the personal resource display? Right, okay. I've only just seen that. I'm not putting this out though, because, you know, it may have been LFUI. I'll update next week. I'm going to try. I'm going to get rid of it. I'm going to, you know, untick that box. I'll try it next week. We'll see. Oops. Right, okay. On to another one, for which I am not at all wrong. We had a bit of a discussion last week because I was trying to explain how elite is pronounced, and it's pronounced elite. So an awful lot of people go, no, it's not. Now, obviously, for people from other countries, I can't help how you pronounce things. There's an awful lot of people from Britain, or claiming to be from Britain, one of whom claimed to be from Birmingham. Now, if you're going to tell me you pronounce it in a different way from Birmingham, I'm going to look a bit quizzical at you. However, if you're going to tell me you've never heard anyone pronounce it elite from Birmingham, you are trolling me, and I'm going to prove it. Okay, now, we've had pronunciations before, where, in fact, really, I am missing a graphic here. Oh my God, where is it? Because we need a very important graphic, which I cannot now find. But we have, oh, there it is. We have, when it comes to pronunciations, basically we develop our pronunciations in different ways. We expect to develop our pronunciations by listening to people we mimic as we grow up, which is why I say grass. But people, the uneducated types in the south of England, say grass because, you know, different areas pronounce things differently. That's fine. However, when it comes to what is the most common way of describing things, we need to look in a dictionary, because a dictionary doesn't dictate to us how things should be pronounced and how we should use certain words. It simply records the most common pronunciations and the most common usages of words. And so it develops. So the Oxford English Dictionary, which is the standard for the UK, the way it describes the pronunciation and the meaning of words compared to, say, 100 years ago, if that dictionary existed 100 years ago, would be different, because language indeed does change. Now, the word élite, of course, is French, and it had an accent on the E. It was absolutely pronounced élite, no question there. Came into use in English a few hundred years ago, and people will be saying, oh yes, but language changes. Indeed it does. Indeed it does. But again, the way the dictionary works now, I'll just show you what it is for, again, because I'm British, the Oxford English Dictionary. And it tells you the two most common pronunciations. There's elite and there's elite. Okay? Now, coming to something else in a minute. Now, another area where people get confused is because they don't actually know how to read phonetics. People say, well, if it's an E at the beginning, it's an E sound. The letter E does not make E sounds. We say E in the alphabet song, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, you know. That's just to help us learn the bloody alphabet. We don't pronounce it like that. And you might be saying, well, E, ceiling. Yes. But what about way? And in fact, E, I together is an A sound. The fact that in some words it's not is because English is such a mongrel language. Sometimes spellings changed and the pronunciation didn't. Sometimes the pronunciation changed and the spelling didn't. So it's a complete mess. If you want to look at how letters are supposed to be pronounced when they're in words, there's two places you can look. One, you can look at the beginning of a dictionary. If you actually look in the beginning of a dictionary, there's a whole section where it'll tell you how to pronounce these things. Secondly, you could look at anglicised Japanese words, because people have done that, have used the correct forms. So for example, an AI is an I sound, such as I learnt this when I was doing judo and other martial arts, like Tayatoshi, for example. I suppose what would be, for a gamer, you'd be thinking of something like, I don't know, waifu, for example, is a more common word amongst gamers. And then EI is an A sound, like sensei, for example. Now, I have to look this up because I'm not into my manga or any of that shit. So let's find... So apparently, keisatsu, police, is apparently one of the 100 words that all manga fans should know. EI is pronounced as an A. So, and that's the case here. EI, elite, elite. And then the other thing you'll notice, there's a little speaker there because for the popular pronunciations, it also gives a little... Where's the Oxford English Dictionary one? Because I've got both up here. I've got Webster's for the US and...
Elite.
So, elite there. Now, here's the interesting one. So, when it came... Obviously, a number of Americans were saying, well, they pronounce it in all sorts of weird and wonderful ways. So, I had a look at Webster's. I can't do it for anyone else. So, people from Australia, I can't help how you pronounce it, or Canada, or indeed any other English-speaking country. Or indeed non-English-speaking countries that learn their English elsewhere. I can't help that either. I mean, I can't help this. Like, if someone says that they pronounce it elite or elite, that is not one of the accepted pronunciations in the dictionary. But of course, the Oxford English Dictionary only provides the most popular pronunciations. So what I am, going on here is, if you're saying you pronounce it in some weird way like elite and you come from Britain, well, okay, I mean, maybe you grew up in the Outer Hebrides and you were raised by sheep, and of course your pronunciation is going to be bad. But to say you've come from a metropolitan area like Birmingham, you've never heard anyone say elite, when that is like the most popular way to say it in the whole country, you are trolling me. You are actually trolling me. Then it comes to American, and I looked up some Americans saying elite, and some of them indeed, as some people said, pronounced it elite. Totally get that. That's fine. And in fact, I saw Donald Trump saying it. Not that I'm going to hold him up as a paragon of scholastic excellence, but nonetheless, I found some. And you look up on the Merriam-Webster, which is the gold standard in the United States, I believe, and it gives 3 pronunciations of elite. It says that the most common pronunciation is elite. So in the United States of America, Merriam-Webster is saying that the most popular pronunciation is elite.
Elite.
But it also has elite and elite. So, but those people saying elite, because there's another way in which people learn pronunciations, and as well as listening to people. And to be fair, this could be a sign of intelligence. I take this to be a sign of intelligence, because I did this when I was young. And sometimes, if you are someone who reads a lot when you're young, it's inevitable that you are going to come across some words that you've never encountered before, particularly if you're reading higher level books. Again, sign of intelligence. So what do you inevitably do at this point? You could go to a dictionary and look it up, which is what I used to do if I didn't know the meaning of the word, but if it was obvious in context, you could also go to a dictionary and look up how it's pronounced. But again, I wouldn't do that. I would look up in a dictionary to find out what it meant, but not how it was pronounced. I would just look at the way it was and try and use some rules of language to work it out. Of course, that's fated to fail in English because there are no rules. Well, there are, but they're always broken. There are more breakages of rules than there are rules. And inevitably that can happen. So I can understand someone coming across that word when they're young and going, well, it's elite or even elite. And because they never heard it said by anyone else for like 10 years or something, and it just sticks. So I can get that. But in terms of whether or how you've heard it, what is the most common pronunciation, that's an objective fact. How you pronounce it is up to you. But what is objective is how it's most commonly pronounced. And you get these from dictionaries. I don't know what the gold standard is in Canada or New Zealand or Australia for dictionaries, so you'd have to look that up yourself. But I do encourage you to look it up in the dictionary, and you will see that, indeed, in both the United States, well, the United States, actually, it's listed as the most common. Elite is the most common. Now, in the Oxford Dictionary, English Dictionary, elite is listed as the second most common. So the fact that I've never heard people say elite, maybe that's because that's more prevalent in the south of England, and I've never really spent much time in the south of England, maybe that's the reason there. Whereas in the north, perhaps a bit more sophisticated, we pronounce it in the old French way, which is where the word comes from. And just the last little thing, because I love this word. It's not actually relevant at all, but it's a lovely word. So, oh God, I always hate it as well. There's a colleague at work that uses this word every now and then. He uses it about 3 times a year in my company. As I hate to resort to flocking now cinephilification. It's a horrible word, but I really don't care if you pronounce stuff like elite. It sounds fine to me. Of course it does. The word itself is a lovely word. And it's basically a word that it talks about. It's a word to describe something meaningless or something like that. Because there's like multiple words in it, like nihili, for example, we know means to make nothing. There's lots of words in there that basically mean nothing, meaningless, that sort of thing. But it's not. I don't think it's really relevant in this context. I think someone's just trying to use a big word. But it's a horrible. But yeah, there's a colleague. I only put that in there because there's a colleague at work that uses it all the time. It's amazing. So there is the mailbox for this week. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and share with other people who may also be interested or need, some education in the pronunciation of elite. And until next time, I'll see you later.